that the prison itself, the very prison, is a cesspool for crime. In other words, it's a place where you go, you elevate and graduate in crime, and you come out and you become more sophisticated in crime. We can talk all we want from now until thy kingdom come about crime. If we do not address the issues that impact on crime, then we'll go nowhere. We'll be just screaming and shouting every time some crime is committed.
Grenada is getting progressively worse. The criminals, these are organized entrepreneurs who understand what they're doing. There are millions of dollars involved in this business. This is big business, my friend. The crime we are dealing with, as I described to you, is low intensity civil war. There's a civil war unfolding in our communities. It has now reached the shores of Grenada.
Now, as Grenada is in the throes of a firearm amnesty meant to mitigate the deleterious impacts of gun violence and illegal firearm possession in the society, citizens in the national community are making sense of the proposed changes to the Firearms Possession Act, which will amend Section 28 sections, that is, of the current legislation. The amendments will include, but are not limited to, the following proposals. Section 5 seeks to increase the penalty for the offense of failing to make a declaration of firearms and ammunition, or making a false declaration, to a fine of $50,000 and to imprisonment for 1 year. Clause 6 seeks to amend Section 9 of the Principal Act to increase the penalties for the offense of manufacturing or dealing in firearms, ammunition, or prohibited weapons, except under and in accordance with the terms of a firearm manufacturer's license or a firearm dealer's license. Clause 7 seeks to amend Section 10 of the Principal Act to increase the penalties for the offense of unlawful acquisition or disposal of firearms and ammunition to imprisonment for not less than 10 years and not more than 20 years on summary conviction, and to imprisonment for not less than 15 years and not more than 40 years on conviction on indictment. Our next guests, Attorney Ruggles Ferguson, King's Counsel, and former Labour representative in the Senate, Chester Humphrey, have very divergent views on how the state should treat with issues on time and criminality on the matter of firearms. On the one hand, Ferguson believes that some of the proposed legislation is a bit too draconian, and Humphrey, on the other hand, welcomes the changes. Chester Humphrey, the immediate past president of the Senate, served 30 years in Parliament as a senator. He was also the former two-term General Secretary of the Caribbean Congress of Labour and served 26 consecutive years as the president of the Grenada Technical and Allied Workers Union. The former senator and a trade unionist is now an industrial relations consultant of Humphrey and Associates, while Mr. Ruggles Ferguson is not only a constitutional attorney, but served many stints as the president of the Grenada Bar Association, of which he continues to be a member. Gentlemen, welcome to this week's edition of the Bub Report for this very important conversation.
Yes, thank you, Kellon, and good morning to you and your listeners and viewers, and good morning to my colleague and friend, Chess. As you indicated, we hold different views, probably diametrically opposing views on certain questions. Probably
Yes.
this might be one. And so I look forward to the program.
Absolutely. Senator, welcome back to the program. You have never shied away from appearing on the Bub Report, so we're always happy to have you. And we know that you do have some very strong opinions in respect of this subject. So welcome to the program, sir.
Well, let me say thanks again, Kellen, for this opportunity to exchange information and to, of course, hold a discourse in public, which is educational. The
Yes.
public will know, and for those who don't, King's Counsel, Ruggles Ferguson, and myself have a very long, fraternal, very warm, comradely relationship going back many years. I am a bit of a senior, but notwithstanding that, he is really a very dear friend and comrade of mine. We share
Mhm.
ideological views, but on some issues we have divergent. I mean, on this question of crime and punishment and
Yes.
criminality, our views can't be more divergent than they are.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
I look forward to really just a healthy engagement, a divergence of views,
Yes.
all in the interest, because Ruggles has spent a lifetime educating the public,
Mhm.
just not on the law, but of many other things. And he has risen to legal prominence. In fact, he was president of OCBA, so he's held significant legal roles. He is a tremendous legal mind. Um, I understand his role in this purpose, but on this question, the divergence of views are very sharp. They won't be
Absolutely.
personal, I can assure you, but
I,
all
I
for
know
the
it's never
benefit of the
personal.
yeah,
Yes, sir.
all for the benefit of the public.
Public education. And both of
Yeah.
you also share the legacy of being past students of the great GBSS,
Mm.
something I
Well,
cannot attest
yes.
to, but
Well. That as well. That as well.
yes,
Yeah. Mm.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, gentlemen, let us talk about the current initiatives to curb crime in the society. Now, can we talk first and foremost about civil society's approach to getting involved in this issue? And Ruggles, I want to begin with you. Of course, the Bar Association recently announced an initiative here on the Bub Report in which it would appear as if they want to speak with some of the warring parties involved with the latest volley of gun violence that we're seeing in the society. Can you talk about those initiatives? And are those initiatives a good place to start before we get to the legislation, to have a conversation about the legislation?
Yes, yes. Thank you, Telon, and good morning again, listeners and viewers. The No, education is important in this process. No doubt we have had a rise in gun crime in recent times, and we have seen, unfortunately, the deaths of about 3 or 4 persons in the last few months, something unheard of in Grenada, and of course affects the sensibilities of society. Now, the Bar Association, let me indicate, and I know Francis Paul, the president, recently speaking about the peace initiative of the Grenada Bar Association. And in fact, that initiative will be launched in the coming week, the peace initiative. And it's important that not only we talk about this issue, that we criticize where we feel criticism is due, but more importantly, that we get involved in the process, because crime affects everybody. Crime affects all facets of society. And what the Grenada Bar Association has done, because lawyers, especially those involved in criminal practice, they get involved in they interface with people who are charged with criminal activities. They interface with them, they speak to them, they take them in their confidence, they share issues, and lawyers represent these individuals.
Mhm.
Now, a lawyer's role, and that has been my very strong position, cannot be just to represent people and
Mhm.
deal with a matter in court, but we come into day to day, we come in contact with issues that impact society, that opens our eyes to the very cause of crime, to the root of crime. And therefore, we must play a transformative role. And that has been my role in the Grenada Bar Association and the OECS Bar Association, OGBA, to play a transformative role. Not just talk about the problem, but to try to solve the problem or minimize the effects of the problem as best as possible. So peace initiative is about, it involves the Bar Association. We have had several meetings over the last few weeks with other members of civil society, and we have brought on board several individuals, one of whom, for example, is Dr. Neil Chaitan, who is a crime reduction specialist. Now, in all of this, we need people who specialize in particular areas to assist the process. Claude Douglas himself is a sociologist. We have connected with the trade union movement, with the Grenada Chamber of Commerce, with the churches, all to ensure that there is a united effort moving forward on crime, on the amnesty, and also to get educational messages out there to engage our students, to engage our communities, to engage the actual people who are involved in crime or perceived to be involved in crime, who are perceived to be leaders, gang leaders, to engage these people to play our role effectively in ensuring that crime is reduced. So
as an all of society approach. Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Senator Mr. Humphrey, let me bring you in here, sir, to talk about those initiatives. You heard Mr. Ferguson's articulations here. He's saying that they're not waiting on government.
Yes.
That it should not only be government, but that society should get involved in arresting. Absolutely. Yes. Mr. Humphrey, your thoughts on knee-jerk reaction.
And I repeat, not a knee-jerk scream and shout for a few days.
Yes.
It dies down, and until it happens again, we start to scream and shout. What do we do in the interim? What kind of crime is? And therefore, that's why we have been engaging on all of these measures, including legislative measures being introduced by the state.
Yes, absolutely. Mr. Humphrey, not a knee-jerk reaction, says Mr. Ferguson. Go ahead.
Yes, Dr. Bob. All of the recommendations enunciated by my comrade Ruggles Ferguson are indeed very laudable, are indeed necessary, can contribute in some way. There could be no argument about that, and therefore I won't engage in an argument against that. In other words, all hands on board, and all aspects of society should be involved, because this is a societal problem. Let me say, what Mr. Ferguson has articulated has been articulated in Jamaica, has been articulated in Trinidad, has been articulated in St. Lucia, has been articulated in St. Vincent, has been articulated in Caracas, has been articulated in Soweto in South Africa, and all the high crime areas of the world that you can talk about. So this is nothing new. All of the so-called crime experts who have university recognized degrees in sociology and all of that, all have made their contribution. What is missing here is an understanding and the nature of the crime that we are dealing with. In my view, and I submit, society, Grenadian society, is now grappling with a low-intensity civil war brought on in the context of the narco economy. So this is not a crime in which, you went into the village of Montmaris after a girl and the young, as youngsters, 16 full-blooded males with all the hormones going, and you think this is an outsider coming through. It's not that. Crime is not that. It's not the old old-time gang warfare you saw during the carnival time when different villages were at a shanty mill against something, quite often provoked by going to court a girl in the wrong village. The crime that we're witnessing here, the nature, the intensity of it, the character of it is completely different, right? And the fact that you could go talk, this crime here is what I describe as enterprise crime. And it knows no borders, it knows no rules, it offers no trials, it has no jury, it has no defense attorney, you don't have an opportunity for defense, right? And I want you to look at the nature of the crime. Only a few months ago, there was an execution, according to police sources and public information that's in the public domain that nobody has contested. An individual known by the security, the police in both jurisdictions of St. Vincent and of Grenada, of an individual who was in a manner of speaking executed in a particular southern community here. That individual, they claim, as one of the leading business entrepreneurs in the illegal narco trade. Because the nature of the crime that we're seeing here now in Trinidad and the boldness and what's taking place. I mean, only last week, there was a shootout in which 3-4 people were shot. I think 2 were killed, 2 went into the hospital. And in the hospital, in broad daylight, in the view of people delivering health care to sick people, individuals went into the hospital where the 2 people who survived the initial gunshot exchange out in the public were literally, one of them, of course, as I understand it, or possibly 2, were then executed openly in the hospital. St. Lucia had 80-something murders, I think it is, right?
Last
No,
year.
coming back, right? Coming back to, and in St. Vincent, while the Prime Minister was away on state business, there was an
a mass
open
shooting
gun.
there.
There was a, not, you call it a mass shooting. There was an open war. It was like Gaza. It was like Gaza, open warfare. In Jamaica, in order to try to arrest this situation, the army had to be brought in. A state of emergency had to be declared. Soldiers, armed soldiers, as going into a war zone. Now, I'm saying all of this to situate what we are talking about, right? Because what we are talking about is not the traditional crime, boy hit another one in a football match because somebody said something about somebody's mother. It's not that. The crime we are dealing with, as I described to you, is low intensity civil war. There's a civil war unfolding in our communities. It has now reached the shores of Grenada. So the individual that was executed in the south from neighboring St. Vincent, when he was being buried and his body was being interred, there was an assembly of Vincentian citizenry larger than any political rally that could have been called by any of the contending political parties. I want you to spend a moment contemplating what I'm describing here, because unfortunately, all of the good recommendations by Mr. Ferguson and the good recommendations of others will not address that kind of problem. That's a different problem, a different scale. What we are talking about is war. There is a war unfolding, driven by the economics of cocaine. Okay, and we have to consider as a society, how does the state, because the state is being disarmed, right? The state is being paralyzed. and how do we as citizens look towards the state and give those who are elected to govern the wherewithal so that they would have the political will to engage in this war that's taking place. It's a war in which lives are being lost. In fact, in the Grenada context, one of those arrested for the most recent so-called execution also has to his name another execution, and if not possible, 2 more executions. Okay, so what is being talked about here? All of the recommendations, as good as they are, fall far short. And let me say before we enter into the real thing, the government is on the right track, but it is far from sufficient. It is far from sufficient. And if we don't understand the nature and character of what we're dealing with, it's simple. If a doctor has not properly diagnosed the patient and he's not aware really of what are the issues confronting the patient, then the medication prescribed will not likely work. And that's what we are faced. That's what we are faced with.
Diagnose the issue. Let's bring back Ruggles here. Ruggles, you've heard Mr. Humphrey. Yes. He's saying that the nature of this particular upsurge in crime we are seeing, the character of it is different, which requires a different set of prescriptions. That he's saying that what you're proposing here in respect of the Bar Association has been attempted in the other jurisdictions, and we see the nature of crime in those jurisdictions. The type of civil society approaches that has been the conventional way of treating to those issues may not work in this period. Your thoughts, Ruggles?
Well, first of all, let me disagree fundamentally with my friend that these efforts and initiatives have been tried in other jurisdictions. There may have been talk about it, and that's the problem. We always talk about the problem. We always react to the problem, but we don't address these problems. Need not just a reaction, but it needs consistent, dedicated, organized work for change. That's how you bring about change. And there is not in Grenada even. You may have civil society talking, but everybody leaves crime up to the police and the government to solve. We need to collectively get involved in the solution to crime. And what I agree with the Chesson is that we have to properly diagnose the issue. How do we diagnose it? Different people, he might have a view as to what, that's his personal view. It may or may not be correct. We need scientific data, and that's part of the problem. You know, we react to crime. There's a shooting, a couple shootings, and when we say shootings are prevalent, and therefore that's the way we need to deal with it. But when you go to the hard, cold scientific data, which all our states have a problem in gathering and presenting in a way that important policy decisions can be taken. And I agree, we need to diagnose the problem, whatever the origin of the problem, and let me address some of the specific issues he raised. And let us assume that he's correct. Then what do we need? What we need first and foremost is a strengthened security arm of the state, more resources being injected, not just for the police generally, but for the specific departments of the police responsible for fighting crime. One. And secondly, that we can no longer take a localized approach to crime. We must take a regional approach to crime because it is getting more and more sophisticated with the use of technology. So we must take a more regional approach to crime. What essentially we are doing and what is being proposed is, listen, let us deal with it after the fact. So, for example, somebody arrested and charged for a killing in relation to a gun crime. That person is already dead. And the court is dealing with it at the last stage of the process. What we're trying to prevent is from that person being dead in the first case. What we're trying to prevent is people picking up these illegal arms and pursuing it for the very reason that my friend has indicated. And I agree fully. If it's one statement I agree with, is that we need to diagnose the problem and diagnose it effectively. So, for example, let's say one of it is, as is proposed under the Firearms Act, that you increase the sentences from a minimum of 4 years to a minimum of 2 years to a minimum of 10 years and a maximum of 20
of
years.
20.
20 years in the magistrate's court if you are charged summarily. So for gun crimes, you can either be charged summarily or indictably. A summary charge is where the magistrate has the jurisdiction to hear and determine that matter. So let us say, and there are two issues, and I think we need to lay it on the table very early that reflect my own concerns and the concerns of several others. One, part of the reaction is introducing one minimum mandatory sentences for firearms, a minimum sentence of 10 years and a maximum of 20 years in the magistrate's court if it's a summary offense. If it's an indictable offense, triable in the High Court, it's a minimum, the court's hands are tied, of 20 years and a maximum of 40 years. Plus, the other aspect of it is that the amendment and the amendment to the Criminal Procedure Code has to be seen in conjunction with the Firearms Act. What the amendment to the Criminal Procedure Code does is to remove the discretion of the magistrate to grant bail for firearm offenses. In other words, it can be only granted in the High Court. So, there are only two offenses existing right now where a magistrate cannot grant bail. It's for treason and murder. For any of these two crimes, and the more popular crime is murder for when you compare the two. So a magistrate cannot grant bail for murder. And what is being done is to introduce in the Criminal Procedure Code an exclusion to add offenses under the Firearm Act, which are liable, where you're liable for 5 years imprisonment or more. So the magistrate is good enough to impose a 10-year minimum sentence or to impose a maximum sentence of 20 years, but it's not good enough to grant bail at the end of the day. And irrespective of what is said, the starting point for these things is the presumption of innocence. So you have somebody who is arrested, picked up on a firearms charge, not say immediately that person can get bail. You have to go to the High Court.
Yes.
Go through the expense and time of infringement. And we are not so much opposed to increasing sentences.
Yes,
can increase sentences. But when you have mandatory minimum sentence,
yes. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, yes, Ruggles. Stick a pin there because I do believe you went ahead a little bit there. I think you went ahead a little bit there in respect of the meat and potatoes of the legislation. But I do want to bring back Mr. Humphrey here in respect of the proposed legislation.
Let me say, yes. The legislation is just the beginning. The state has much further to go and should dare to go there, notwithstanding the pleadings of my good friend and others in the legal fraternity. As I said to you before, this is a state of war. Yes? And in a state of war, you have to, in some instances, suspend civil liberties. In some instances, there's forced conscription into the armed forces. This is a state of war. And evidence that it's a state of war. And I'm happy that Mr. Ferguson brought in the fact that crime must be seen regionally, because it is a regional phenomenon driven by the entry into our sphere of life, the narco trade. Look, about 6 weeks ago, the news reported that a village shop somewhere in Northeast, I can't remember the details, was raided by the police, who recovered narcotics in a village shop in the tune of, I think it's $750,000. Again, this is not a popsicle crime activity, right? This is huge business that transcends our borders. Everything Mr. Ferguson says about the inadequacy of the law enforcement arm of the state in terms of the material provisions for it, both in terms of manpower, technology, and all that else, he's absolutely correct. The state is not prepared for this war. One thing I can tell you, if you compare the colonial period to now, where punishment was certain, in the current liberal legal construct, in the liberal philosophical construct that has taken over our judiciary. First of all, I'm an advocate for the death penalty, and I believe in gun crimes, in knife crimes, in crimes of rape and murder. I believe the death penalty should apply. My good friend Ralph Gonzalez and I have had this argument as long as myself and Ruggles. But I was pleased to hear only sometime last year that Dr. Gonzalez finally arrived at the point that we have to restore the death penalty. On the heels of his pronouncements, I think that Mia Motley, and I'm saying so subject to correction, may have either dovetailed or partially adopted or said something to the effect. But certainly, there is a lot of questions about what is happening at the level of the dispensation of justice, at the level of the magistracy. I have seen it myself. I've seen a case in which an adult committed a sexual offense against an infant, a male of 30-something years, forced a 5-year-old child to have performed sexual oral sex on the individual. The case went before the magistracy in the initial cases. The individual pleaded guilty. He pleaded guilty to the offense and was never given a custodial sentence. Both Prime Minister Mia Motley and Ralph Gonzalez have serious issues with the dispensation of justice. I don't want to get into that detail. It's a very controversial matter, and it's a sort of sidestep. But I'm saying to you, in the context of crime, the government, in terms of strengthening the penalty, Sir Ferguson says it costs a lot of money. Well, if it costs a lot of money, don't get involved. And let me say something to you. All that he has said needs to be done. But when you go back to the nature of it, let me tell you, in this phase that we are in the kind of crime we are seeing here now, serious murder, there are whole families. I mean, I don't want to give you an anecdote about my life, but I remember once I went to a harvest and I didn't steal an item. I found the item on the steps going to the harvest. And when I used the item, some child said it was his. And I said, no, I want that in a dip, because in the harvest there were dips. And my grandmother was called. All right. And I said, Gran, I want that in a dip. And they went to the people who prepared the dip. And the people who prepared the dip said, this item was never placed in the dip. Well, Dr. Bob, I remember that curtail I get up until now. And I hold that responsibility.
Accountability. Yeah.
Accountability. And that was my grandmother. That was my grandmother. No.
Yeah.
There are families involved in this narco trade. They are aware what their sons are doing. They are beneficiaries of it. Their families are supported by it economically. So it's the nature and character of what we deal in is completely different. And this is why I'm saying to you, the remedy has got to be different. And the courts have their role, no doubt. Human rights people, no doubt, have their role. But the state must have the wherewithal in a period of war. And let me tell you something. Shortly, once these guys have lost the restraining conscience of murder, right, by executions, but you and I are easy victims. And it happens in neighboring Trinidad. They tell you it happens there. And this is what we are facing. We have to understand what we are facing to understand what the solutions are. What my friend Ferguson is talking about is all well and good for an advanced social liberal society as the UK. That may work there. But even in the UK, at times of war, stringent conditions are applied. Right? And we have in the toolkit in dealing with this question, because if you notice, Grenada is getting progressively worse. The criminals, these are organized entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs who understand what they're doing. There are millions of dollars involved in this business. This is big business, my friend.
Yeah,
And as a result of that, a whole infrastructure within the state has developed around that. And it's not something that can easily be dismantled.
Yes,
and therefore, in that toolkit, let me just finish. I won't be long. In that toolkit, every toolkit has crucial bits of tools. And in that toolkit must be the ability of the state to execute those who after due process. And that must happen within 24 months. From the time the crime is committed, from the time a charge is laid, from the time all the appeals. And it would mean disengaging from the Inter-American thing on human rights. It would mean, and I will hold a plebiscite on that, and invite the Grenadian people to redefine whether or not an execution is inhuman punishment. Unless we do that, Kalan, this is a small society of 110,000 people, right? Unless we do that, out goes the window our tourism product, right? Out goes the window of a tourism product. Incomes increasing poverty, and with increasing poverty, a greater expansion of the narco trade, the systemic disintegration of the state, and the control of the state by narco individuals. This is what we are facing. I'm not being alarmist. I am not being alarmist.
Yes, let us give Ruggles an opportunity. Let us give. You've said a lot there, and I'm sure a lot of what you articulated is like fingernails on a chalkboard for Ruggles. Yes, Ruggles, I'll give you the opportunity.
It's a classic emotional response, and crime does drive emotions. People are affected by crime. It does drive emotions, but you see, my friend is basing his argument on certain philosophical positions and certain statistics that he thinks are correct. Now, we don't know. I don't know myself. What I do know, however, is this. Right now, we have a prison that is overcrowded.
Build a bigger one.
200 inmates. They are now over 400. Believed that the prison itself, the very prison, is a cesspool for crime. In other words, it's a place where you go, you elevate and graduate in crime, and you come out and you become more sophisticated in crime. That's what happens. You have a situation where you have prison officers working hard, place understaffed, people working extended hours to try to hold the situation together. You once had a rehabilitation program and education program that was dubbed to be the best in the Caribbean, where our prisons performed the best at school even, where people were prepared in a prison to come out as a better citizen and contribute to society. Whereas now, you're talking about sending people and more people to prison. Are we going to build more and more prisons throughout the country to punish everybody? And at the end of the day, to have the graduates coming out and committing more sophisticated crime? Is that what we want? That is what these knee-jerk reactions about mandatory minimum sentences, and I'm not saying, I don't want, sometimes when we engage in these debates, people get the wrong impression. And the first thing that we have to recognize is that Grenada cannot do it alone. That we need a regional approach. And let me tell you, as far as the legal profession is concerned, and you know my position clearly on the Caribbean Court of Justice, yes. In October 2023, the CCJ hosted in Barbados a symposium on crime, bringing together all the stakeholders in the region on crime. The DPPs, the attorneys general, judges, chief justices, magistrates, police commissioners, prison officials, over a 2-day period, bar associations, to discuss crime. We don't know what the police face. We don't know what the prisons and the prison officers face. They are the experts in the respective area. And starting off with an informed, sober, objective discussion on crime. I was invited to that symposium. I attended. It was an enriching experience. At the end of which, there is what you call the Needham's Point Declaration to address criminal justice reform in the region. And that covered the initiatives that ought to be embarked on at the level of the court system, at the level of the prosecution and police, at the level of the state in relation to legislation. Every single aspect of it was discussed. You had the police commissioners from, I remember clearly, Jamaica and Bahamas in particular, playing a very active role and exchanging notes on these issues, out of which came the Needham's Point Declaration. And part of it, they agreed with the heads that crime be viewed as a public health emergency. So there's no issue about downplaying crime or minimizing crime. It is recognized to be a public health emergency. And one of the policy interventions, recommendations made at that meeting was that there must be urgent provision of adequate human, financial, and other resources to criminal justice situations and agencies, including particularly the police and prosecution services, the judiciary, and the prison services. No, we can talk all we want from now until thy kingdom come about crime. If we do not address the issues that impact on crime, then we'll go nowhere. We'll be just screaming and shouting every time some crime is committed. And crime is more widely reported now, by the way. Some of these things
it sure is.
A long time ago.
Yes, Ruggles, it sure is. But I believe what Mr. Humphrey is saying here is that we are in a bit of an emergency situation that requires extraordinary measures. Yes, yes.
Could I make an intervention here?
Yes.
Everything that Mr. Ferguson has said, I'm in agreement with him 100%. In other words, all the prescriptions of things that need to be done in an integrated, holistic way, right, has got to be done. No sane or reasonable or rational person could argue with those. I accept those. So for me, that's
Right, but
not
are
the
they being
debate.
done, Tess? Are they
No,
being done? Are we seeing it as important enough? So we
well,
agree on that.
well,
But the fact
yes,
is,
yes,
are
yes.
any efforts being made to do it? That's
Well,
the
and
issue.
I would agree with you that in the Grenada context, certainly not enough, especially given the background that have, because here you have a prison officer working. Well, first of all, I think prisons should be desegregated, should be segregated out, right? And I'm agreeing with you that a lone penal institution in which you mix up all kinds of persons, a guy going there for thief and a foul, and one going there for robbing a bank, another one going there for executing two people, and you have all of them mixed up together. No, I think we should have a serious crime penal institution. And let me tell you this: under the period, I don't want to go back to the revolution and create a cloud of mystery over all of these issues. But the point I'm making to you here is this: we should have a serious crime penal institution with people who are convicted, right, for serious crime, including murders, and those awaiting executions should be held separate and apart from those who are involved in the mundane crime where the priest could go in and talk to them and a soul could be saved, that kind of thing. And it's necessary. It's necessary. So I'm not in an argument. I think Sir Ferguson and I are on one. However, where we differ is that there are things that must be done immediately, and there are things that will happen progressively over time. The state has a limit of funds, right, in which it must do a whole range of different things. Yes, there must be, I mean, as I said to you before, the police and prison officers. The prison officers are overworked, underpaid. A guy is caught with $5 million worth at street value pound of narcotics. Goes before the magistrate who charges him $20,000. That's got to be a joke. That has got to be a joke. A $20,000 fine for being in possession of $5 million worth of narcotics. What do you think would happen in a prison where a prison officer, poorly paid, overworked, poorly trained, little or no kind of support resources? What do you think would happen? And that's the point I'm making. We are dealing with a problem where the very existence of the state, and this is not being alarmist. I'm not being alarmist. I'm pointing to you. Go to Jamaica. Go to St. Lucia. I'm not being alarmist. These are real things that are happening in Trinidad and Tobago and in Jamaica. The army, which is set up precisely to defend the state against foreign aggression, is now doing police work because of the state of deterioration of things. We have the same judicial jurisprudence that we follow, right? I am saying that, first of all, the measures taken by the current government, I am 110% in support of it. Two, the measures are insufficient. They need to bring more measures, but of course, a step at a time. More measures. I agree to remove. That's my view. I support that bit of legislation 110% because there are questions arising in the minds of ordinary citizens, including myself, which has reached the level of prime ministers, where there are questions about issues touching and concerning the dispensation of justice at the level of the magistracy. That's all I'm saying, right? I say no more than that. And these are facts. It's not being alarmist. These are factual issues. And so, to come back, I support everything Mr. Ferguson says. But the state needs to act because there's a significant void. And we are spending the liberal jurisprudence, which has overrun us now, ascribes more empathy to the criminal than to the victim. That's how I see it as a citizen. That's how I see it as a citizen. A la the case involving the sexual assault on an infant. Okay? So we have a lopsided down arrangement in the whole judicial philosophy now. So a lot of time is spent on the rights of the criminal. Here's a criminal who does not afford you a hearing, does not afford you a defense attorney, does not afford you a trial by a jury, does not afford you bail. You are executed by them. This is what has been happening in the last few days. And the police have said in its most recent public statements to the public, in order to allay the growing anxiety of the public. But wait a minute. What we see recently here is related to drugs. But every Tom, Dick, and Harry knows that. I grew up on the Carenage. I grew up, I know the culture. I understand the cultural thinking. This is not foreign to me. I didn't have to go and study that in a textbook. I know it, right? I know it. And this is what we are facing here. So I understand Mr. Ferguson has this rule. And frankly, if I commit a crime, the first lawyer I'm going to run to will be Ruggles. If I commit a crime, the first person, I would need Mr. Ruggles' help.
Well,
So
yes, of course.
I
I
am
would
not
plead
putting
with
it
them
down.
not to give you the 10-year mandatory minimum.
The mandatory.
You will do what is expected
You can
to
bless
do.
you.
No, you will
Yes.
do you
Within
will
the
do what is
liberal order,
expected.
within the liberal
You
order that
will
you just
do-
critiqued, Mr.
Yes.
Humphrey.
No.
Yes.
Well, it's this is a light movement, but
Yes.
to be serious,
Yes.
to be serious. Again, I repeat, I give 110 support to this government on the measures that it has initially taken. This in itself wouldn't. It has to go further. It has to introduce into the toolkit. It has to reclassify murder and murder at the point of a gun. Murder at the point of a gun, in my view, should be a capital offense of the most serious type. It shouldn't be no non-capital murder. So so going into the criminal code has to be now dealt with deeper. And I would advocate that we have a plebiscite on the restoration of the death penalty. Let the citizens of Grenada and not a judge or the judiciary determine whether or not
Or the
the
Privy
state
Council.
or the Privy Council for that matter, by giving the citizens a simple opportunity to determine the question whether or not execution after due process in the court is not cruel and unusual.
Yes.
And I can
Ruggles,
guarantee you from where I sit that the vast majority of the citizens of this country would come to that conclusion and support that amendment. And for those who commit those crimes and are brought guilty, should be hung.
yeah. Mr. Ferguson.
All within a 24-month period.
Yeah,
And if
Mr.
it is
Ferguson.
possible,
Mr. Humphrey. Yes. Yes, Mr. Humphrey just essentially laid out a serious indictment of the notions of due process and constitutional rights within the context of what happens when a criminal offender is adjudicated. And of course, in Grenada's system, which is based on that Western order, it's about the presumption of innocence until proven otherwise in a court of law, as the evidence comes to bear. So what Mr. Humphrey is saying here is essentially that given the current state that we in, that even that particular liberal order does not stand up to the current reality of crime that we are confronting, which is a bigger beast. Mr. Ferguson, over to you for a response.
Yes.
And then I want to respect your time. I know you have to go. And so after that, we will go to you two gentlemen for closing comments. But go ahead, Mr. Ferguson.
Yes. First of all, let me just address Jamaica, St. Lucia, and these examples given. The problems have developed to the extent they have simply because the approach of my dear friend has been taken and you never address the root of these issues. You don't seek to discover what are the central causes and also try to address this in the meantime. Now, to address crime, it requires efforts at several levels. The parenting level, the schools, the community, If we did that 10 years ago, we'll be reaping some benefit from it. Now, we are part of a wider world, and we are influenced by the activities of a wider world. And we also have to bear that in mind. Now, what my friend is saying, how much, and we go to the actual amendments here, and how they fit into the context of all of this. First of all, the criticisms of the judiciary. You know, part and parcel of the role of the judiciary is to rule in accordance with the law and accordance with the evidence presented before it. Now, there may be issues, instances where everybody would be critical of some decision of the judiciary. That's part and parcel of it. It's like politicians. At the end of the day, but a magistrate or other judicial officer has to approach these issues based on the evidence before the court. And many times people comment in the public domain. They are commenting on based on what people say on social media and all the other likes. Whether or not you find disfavor, or the public is likely to find disfavor with the magistrate or judicial officer, that individual, and that's why you have to be strong to do the job, is ruling on the basis of the facts before it. So if members of the public have information, and we've many times faced that issue. Everybody discusses what happens in the rum shop and other places, but you don't get that evidence where it's supposed to be. So the judicial officer rules in accordance with that. And our judicial officers work hard, long hours, limited resources. They have to face issues in the communities day to day. In fact, they do deal with 90% of the matters that go through the criminal justice system. Judges deal with much less. Why are we taking away the discretion of the magistrates? Again, it's a classic lack of confidence in our own people. You could have the best lawyer in the world become a magistrate, and inevitably that person will be criticized for decisions. Everybody wouldn't agree, but you know what? You know what makes that person a great judicial officer? Irrespective of the noise around him or her, that person rules in accordance with the law and the evidence before it. One. Secondly, these same leaders, and the examples my friend gave, sitting at the heads of government, right, speaking about crime, are the same people, and I'm just speaking collectively here, not necessarily any individuals, that don't put resources into the criminal justice system. In the meantime, we have a constitution. I am not making the pronouncement. We have a constitution that says you are entitled to the presumption of innocence. And I know my good friend and comrade always preaches law and order. But we can't preach law and order when it's convenient to us. It's across the board. We have a constitution that says you are entitled to the presumption of innocence until you either plead guilty or you're proven guilty by a competent court established by law. That's Section 8 of the Constitution. And the constitutional mandate must always be upheld. No, I'm not saying we need to address crime. We have never had the approach. And that's why I always laud institutions like the CCJ. That's an academy of law. It's not like the Privy Council that just a matter comes before it, it hears the matter, it rules on it, and they don't play any role in our local justice system. The CCJ had that initiative to start a process that we should all try to follow. So these knee-jerk reactions, they will remain that, right? And the burden falls on the same police, on the same prison officers, who then we criticize for not dealing with crime, because that's It's a plaster on a sore mentality and approach that we take. So at the end of the day, if you want to, and you use Trinidad as an example, bad example, because you know what happens in Trinidad? In Trinidad, government and opposition blaming each other for crime, blaming each other and not supporting initiatives to address crime. They blame each other. And they continue to blame each other over the years up to now, with the results that crime has increased exponentially. Talking about hanging, 9 people were hanged at the end of 1999. 1999. You sending a message to society, hang 9. 9 of them hang. You want to make an example. And the next year, crime increase, not decrease. So when we make these statements, they are attractive emotional statements. They appeal to public sentiments. Those of us who operate in the system and understand the challenges of the system. And that is why I say the Bar Association, it's time to stop talking. It's time for the public not to see the role of lawyers just as they see defending criminals. And let me just make that point that my friend made. He speaks about, listen, no due process. You shoot a man, you don't give him the benefit of due
capital
process.
punishment.
So should he be
Capital
treated?
punishment.
Should he be treated? That person is entitled to due process. That's what our Constitution says. And therefore, the same state is responsible for ensuring, as part of civilized society, that the mechanisms are there to ensure that we have speedy trials. To ensure that we have speedy trials. We need to ensure that we have a system at the end of the day, that when people go to prison, and Grenada, mind you, had one of the best prison systems as far as rehabilitation was concerned. When the St. Lucia prison was built, Commissioner Courtney was taken from Grenada to run the institution. Unfortunately, he fell ill and was not able to do the job he intended to do. So all I'm saying, and my issue is not so much about the increased sentence. Cool. But you cannot impose mandatory minimum sentences of such a significant number. And we all would understand that when our families or somebody or loved ones are picked up, and then we realize the gravity of what faces us. You remove the discretion on a magistrate who has their sentencing principles established by the court. Their principles for bail established by the court is not automatic, it's based on a judicial process. So I'm saying, listen, we got to move away from these old, archaic, knee-jerk reactions and operate as the civilized society that we wish to operate. And I agree that the police inject resources. The poor police getting blamed for everything, right? I look at the conditions under which they operate. So I'm saying, listen, at the end of the day, what is the value of somebody being arrested, an innocent man being arrested, right? Innocent men do get arrested. I'm sure my dear colleague understands that. Innocent people do get arrested. They are all entitled to the presumption of innocence. And now they get arrested. They have family. They have jobs. And you say, yeah, you had to wait until about 3 weeks before bail is considered because the judge busy and overburdened with matters before him or her. We need to be realistic. We have a constitution. We don't operate arbitrarily based on the whims and fancies of individuals. So, and that is what order is about. That is what the rule of law is about. That is what law and order is about. So it's all I'm saying. I'm not supporting crime. I'm not saying turn a blind eye to crime. In fact, I'm saying we need as citizens to get more involved in addressing crime and in addressing the root causes of crime. because the government alone cannot do it. The police
and
alone
and,
cannot do it.
and all of society approach as you articulated. But
Precisely.
gentlemen, this is a very, very important debate that needs to continue. But Mr. Humphrey, I want to give you a quick chance of reply before we get to closing comments. We'll take a break and then get to closing comments. But I want to give you a quick right of reply before we do, based on what Mr. Ferguson just articulated.
Unless I have misconstrued a significant point here, I have
Yes.
never articulated that there ought not to be due process. Never articulated that. I am saying to you, and I understand the rule of evidence and all of that. What I couldn't understand is how an individual, having pleaded guilty to an offense against an infant, was never given a custodial sentence and was allowed to walk away. Was allowed to walk away with a minimum fine, both restitutionally and a fine paid to the state. The amount was so ordered by the then judicial officer was so minuscule, and the whole situation was so outrageous that it took a Grenadian lawyer in the United States to move in a manner to ensure that that Grenadian family, who essentially did not get the justice from the judicial officer sitting on the case at the magisterial level, ended up with a custodial sentence in the United States on the basis of all of the same evidence. So I just want to be clear that I have never advocated without due process. All I'm saying to you is this, that I agree with Mr. Ferguson that we have to work. I agree with Mr. Ferguson that there are arms of the state that are insufficient, that are not provided with adequate, and I empathize with the police. Our police officers work here diligently, exceedingly hard, with low pay and poor working conditions. You just got to look around in the conditions under which they work. You just have to look at their retiring benefits, etc., to realize. And this is in a context where the narco economy has infiltrated the society, and it's turning the society upside down. The state is at war, right? There is a low-intensity civil war unfolding here. And unfortunately, Mr. Ferguson, your prescription is insufficient to deal with these issues, and the state must act. How did it act? With their current amendment, it has removed the jurisdiction of bail from the judiciary under certain conditions and put it in the hands. Should we build more prisons? Yes. I believe we should segregate prisons. I believe we should change the criminal code. I believe that the use of a firearm in the commission of a murder must be a capital offense. And I believe in the restoration of the death penalty. And I think these are all part of a toolkit. Like every vehicle. A vehicle don't come with a jack alone. Neither does it come with a wheel spanner alone. It's a combination of things to address the problem. In the event that you get a puncture somewhere, you can fix it. So Mr. Ferguson and I are on one on many issues. Where we are not at one is that it is my submission that in the current context of where we are, and we just have to look around at our neighbors, and we could, St. Lucia was not where it was today. St. Vincent was not always where it was. Grenada is fast getting there. The number one guy in the narco trade in St. Vincent, according to public information, was executed here in Grenada. So yes, there's a boardwalk crime. We are facing a siege, and therefore the liberal construct is insufficient. It's insufficient to provide the security necessary for law-abiding citizens. For law-abiding citizens, because there will come a time, and hear what? One or two of the guys currently who are arrested for these executions, apparently one has 2 such executions under his belt. So he executes first, you arrest him, then he gets bail, he goes out, he executes again. When does this stop? I don't think that the Constitution contemplates the situation that we are in now. I don't think it contemplates that. And I could recall during the colonial time, justice was swift it was precise, it was predictable. You rape, you are flogged with a cat o' nine tail. Long sentences. And in my days, there were very few rapes. There were very few murders. Growing up, I could point to about 2 murders. What has happened since we became independent and in charge of our own destiny, schooled in the liberalism of British jurisprudence, right? We are incapable, quite frankly, we are incapable. And I believe the government is on the right track. Insufficient, but it's a step in the right direction. And I am monitoring to see the other steps that need to be taken. And there must be a significant review, right, of the criminal code and changing how crime is classified, right? And I say an early plebiscite, just on one question, whether or not executions are unusual or uncruel, or usual and cruel punishment, and the restoration of the death penalty for crimes of the nature of the ones we have just seen. 2 fellas at a football match and one used a bad word, cussing another mother, and he got knocked down with a bottle or a brick and he died. I wouldn't hang a youngster for that. But what we're witnessing here, the police has said so. The police has said to the country, and I believe it's an attempt to lay the fears and anxiety of people. But for persons like me, I become even more anxious. But the police has said that what we have seen is not the usual crime, is all related to the narco trade. And let me tell you something, there's no priest, no pastor that can go to a family that is handling millions of dollars, whose standard of living has risen tremendously because of that, and who themselves are knowledgeable of the activities for which the youngsters are engaged. I don't see how you rescuing that, my friend. Mm-hmm. So what Mr. Ferguson is talking about, yes, it has a place, but it has a place for a village bully who goes into Montmorris, right, gets a female, annoys the robust males inside there, and there's a conflict between them on a carnival morning. I agree with Mr. Ferguson on that. What we are dealing with here is a low-intensity civil war, right? And that liberalism just won't work.
And on that note, Mr. Humphrey,
just wouldn't work.
Yes, absolutely. Mr. Ferguson, in your wrap-up comments.
At least one prime minister, yes, after years of very contentious debate, one prime minister has stepped forward and admitted that, Chess, you're right. Because I am now of the view that the state has to implement, whether it's for a time or it is in perpetuity, because states evolve, right? But as we face it now, because look, our entire society is at risk. Our tourism will disappear. All it takes is one announcement from the State Department that Grenada, otherwise a peaceful and secure place to go, an advisory is now put out on them. What happens to the hundreds, the thousands of ordinary, upright citizens, poor people who go to work every day to make an honest living? What happened to their jobs? What happens to the ability to transform our economy from a post-plantation economy to a modern service economy, depend on tourism and other things? What has happened? All of that is under threat. So it is not just a simple case of, it's not as simple as Mr. Ferguson puts it. And it is not a knee-jerk reaction. It's a necessary prescription to deal with a particular situation at a particular juncture in history that we find ourselves.
Yes. Mr. Humphrey, on that note, we do have to take a quick break, and I know Mr. Ferguson has to go. But Mr. Ferguson, I promise I will give you an opportunity in your closing comments to respond to or articulate the issues that Mr. Humphrey raised. Our viewers and listeners, please stand by. We're going to take a break and come back with closing comments for this very important conversation on the Firearms Amendment Act. But again, that is just a rubric for a number of other crime-fighting measures that the state need to implement in respect of arresting concerns of crime that Grenada is currently confronting. Please stand by.
Listeners, I see Michael already smiling. He anticipates what I would say. My good friend.
Yeah, and I put my head on a block, and I offer Mr. Brother Bishop the scalpel to cut it off.
The political leader has said several times up to last night that that is not a reflection of her personal views or the views of the party. And you understand, George, how elections at the party level work.
So, Dr. Pei, do you have ties? Do you have ties to the National Democratic Congress, Dr. Pei? Or rather, were you commissioned by the NDC
to use that information? Because it seems interesting that a lot of your advice is very consistent with what was said.
And good luck with everything.
You too, man. May the best candidate win in the town of St. George.
Kill on.
Yes.
You is a young man too, so stop it. Tell everybody you are a young man too.
We are a people who have always aspired for more. Who always aspired to do better. Who's always accepted that not because your mother didn't go to secondary school, you shouldn't go. It has always been the other way around. You should aspire.
You've been there for a long time. Want to be queen of St. Andrews, but yet the problems around you you're not seeing. You can't pray yourself out of the problems in St. Andrews. You must.
Some persons were getting pension after 2 terms in office, right? And the persons that worked for 26 years plus not getting anything. It's just unfair.
God is good, and God looks after me. Not just my wife is no.
Hello, everyone. I am Shanta.
And viewers and listeners, welcome back to this week's edition of the Bub Report. We are discussing crime, punishment, gun violence, and the prescriptions for addressing some of those concerns legislatively and legally. So we've had this week Mr. Chester Humphrey, former senator, former president of the Senate, also president of the Congress of Labor, president general of the Technical and Allied Workers Union, as well as Mr. Ruggles Ferguson, former president of the Grenada Bar Association, but who also is working with the bar currently in his capacity as a criminal defense attorney, constitutional attorney, to really address the issues, the underlying issues of crime, and not doing so within the context of being a knee-jerk reaction, but looking at the material and structural conditions that are causing these issues in the society. So, Mr. Ferguson, I want to go over to you, sir, for some closing comment.
Yes, well, briefly, I know my friend means well, but he just has the wrong archaic, knee-jerk kind of reaction to crime. And crime, 10 years from now, I anticipate that he will be saying the same thing. And we don't have any fundamental change in society. We need to get to the root causes of crime. If we strengthen our security forces and the particular arms of the state to address crime, we'll find a fundamental difference. It is important. It's important because we don't have all the answers. The policy makers don't have the answers. If we agree that crime is a public health emergency, we need to involve the public in the solution to crime. And you will find many unique recommendations, as I found in the meeting in Barbados that gave rise to the Needham's Declaration. And I'm an advocate now for the Needham's Declaration, that every member of parliament should read that declaration arising from Barbados. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. The police are able to tell us best the problems the challenges they're facing. The prison officers, the challenges they're facing. Have we had any discussions with them when we talking about prescriptions? The answer is no. We need to treat this problem in a very holistic way. And for my friend, in any cabinet I have, you'll certainly be the Minister of Labor, but certainly not the Minister of Justice. We don't want to roll back, we don't want to roll back many years.
Or national security. Or national security.
Yes, not national security. But he has a role to play. He has a role to play, and I always respect the fact that he's fearless in expressing his views. no matter how outmoded and conservative that I may think they be on this question. But you know, he has a right to express it. I respect them, and we need individuals like him to put the balance on the discussion and express that view, all of which at the end of the day would assist in driving the process forward. And I wish to commend you, Tukelon, for hosting these very important programs and accommodating and facilitating debates, because I think they are important. But look out for the peace initiative, as is described, driven by the Bar Association, involving the churches, the the business community, the trade union movement, all of civil society and experts. And we expect that to be growing. And we'll also do work in schools and communities. We'll do work among the same gang leaders or perceived gang leaders. We have to have a multifaceted approach to the problem. Not wait until a crime is committed and then we talk about impose minimum mandatory sentences on them and no bail. But continue, my friend, your own advocacy. I think the more you advocate, the more I am convinced that I'm on the right track.
That your position is the correct one. Yes, Mr. Humphrey. Yes, over to you, sir, for some closing comments.
All right. Just to say again that all of the prescriptions of Mr. Ferguson I agree with. There's no divergence of views on those prescriptions. Where we diverge is that his prescriptions are totally inadequate, given the nature and character of the crimes that we're seeing now. And so that's point number one. Point number two, I believe, and I fervently so and deeply so, that the government on the right track on this one. I think they've placed the foot in the right direction. There are other steps to be taken, and along that path, into that toolkit must come the restoration of the death penalty for crimes of the nature of what we have seen recently. Because, as I repeat, there is a low-intensity civil war unfolding, driven by the narco economy that is penetrating and that has penetrated the state, the depth of which I don't know. The police will have much more information than I could ever hope to have. But I can see, I can compare, because Trinidad is not at where it is now. It was not there 50 years ago. Jamaica is not there, right? And this has not been alarmist. This has not been knee-jerk. This is what is necessary if we are going to save the peace and order of our country and the ability of our country to be able to provide fair, progressive opportunities for its young citizens, right? Another mistake we are about to make, and I hold that view on something we probably could discuss. This so-called decriminalization of marijuana is a step in the wrong direction. Sorry I had to enter this at the end, but again, you speak to the police, and I speak to many of them. We are going down a dangerous, slippery road, right? And the results of which will not be good for the state and the society of Grenada as we know it. And that's all I will wish to say at these closing remarks, that in this period of time, unless the state recognizes that we are at war and introduces the measures that it has introduced in the amendments to the Gun Control Act, or whichever act was just recently amended, and to recognize that this is just the first step in a series of more measures that need to be taken in order to curb this, we are going to be in deep, 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 deep trouble. And we are already there.
Up a particular creek without a paddle. I can't say that this program is being broadcast on television. So, but gentlemen, thank you so much for appearing on the Bob Report this week. As Mr. Ferguson articulated, Public education is extremely important, and we should not be having those conversations only when there is an upsurge in crime, but we should be having those conversations perennially in respect of these issues. So again, Mr. Humphrey, Mr. Ferguson, thank you for continuing to do the important work you do around public education. I think it is very important in respect of framing issues that animate conversations in the national community. So gentlemen, thank you for being on the Bub Report this week. Viewers and listeners, Mr. Chester Humphrey and Mr. Ruggles Ferguson, they were here this week to discuss Grenada's Firearms Amendment Act of 2024, and of course other issues relating to crime in the society. Both gentlemen have very divergent views, although there were points of agreement on the best approaches that need to be taken in respect of addressing and arresting the issues of upsurge in gun violence and criminality in the Grenadian society, otherwise known reputationally as having a reputation of peace, tranquility, and safety. And that reputation perhaps maybe being looked at by some as being impacted as a result of what we have been seeing in the society. Viewers and listeners, this has been another edition of the Bub Report. I'm your humble host, Dr. Kellen Bub, wishing everyone a pleasant week ahead. Take care now. Bye-bye. Hi everyone, thanks for checking out the Bub Report's social media pages. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch our weekly live show, follow our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram pages, and also subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can catch repeat episodes on Wednesdays at 4 and 5 p.m. respectively on CRFM Radio and GBN TV in Grenada. We are also viewed on Sundays at 8 p.m. on WPG 10 throughout the Caribbean. Thanks for watching.